Test, test. Test, test. There we go. Okay. Test, test. One, two, three. All right. The sound works now. I'm happy. It's gonna sound a little bit tinny, but that's because I'm in the basement, so it's to be expected. But at least the sound's coming through now. That's 21st century technology is fun until it's not working. But happy Saturday. I got you on my mobile phone, which I learned how to do here recently. So now I got a couple of cameras going for these live streams on Saturdays. And you're getting a look of the first tray that I planted here. They're 12 days old now, I believe, maybe 11. But the tray that's closest to the camera, it's got purple cabbage, and then right behind that is broccoli, some more cabbage pixie. There's nasturtiums right here. So nasturtiums, and then I got calendula, these little seedlings right here. And then behind it are uh, violas and then pansies. So the pansies are Johnny jump ups. I've done those for years now. They do really well in containers. But this whole tray right here, this is going to be going in primarily 3-gallon grow bags when they get planted out. But they're all compact varieties. The nasturtiums are probably one of my favorite for the edible flowers, just because they have such vibrant colors on the flowers when they bloom, and then nasturtiums will go all season long as they're harvested frequently. But I found with a lot of my edible flowers that if I forget or if I show up to a customer's garden and it's kind of wild, where a lot of the flowers have gone to seed, the plant will slow down naturally. But the nasturtiums and the other edible flowers, excluding the calendula, if you deadhead them or if I deadhead them, they'll come back to life pretty quickly. And then they'll continue the cycle of flowering and fruiting, or not fruiting, but producing flowers and then seeds. Uh, so that's the cool thing about those is the nasturtiums, the violets, and the pansies, they'll go all season long. The calendula, that's a different animal. That's a cool season flower. So it does really well up until about July 4th, and then once we get into the July heat and humidity, it kind of it throws up the white towel surrender. It says I'm done. But that's this plant right here. And then over in this rack, I have a bunch of flowers also. You can just kind of see them. And then I have my another red cabbage in this guy in the little baby bag. That's my sample I've been taking out to customer site so they could see what these little grow bags look like. And then this is like kindergarten show and tell today. This is the strawberry plant that I showed here about a month ago. But you can see this now. This thing's kind of blown up. So this strawberry plant is called All Star. It's a June bearing plant, and I'm actually gonna grab my camera phone that you look at right now so we can show this close up. But look at that guy right there. So this is called All Star. It's a June bearing strawberry plant, and look at that. This is first week of March in Minnesota, and we already got a strawberry that's that big. We got a bunch of flowers in here, and then I wanted to show you this too. So you see how this strawberry here is, it looks like a normal strawberry that you'd see at the grocery store at a farmer's market. Nice full berry. And then over here we have another good sized berry, but this one, all these leaves. This one's a little misshapen. I'm trying to get a good view. There you go. You can kind of see how that looks. And it's already starting to blush, so you can see it down where my thumb is. It's starting to turn red. So in about a week or so, this will be ready to eat. But uh, this berry right here is misshapen, and I did this intentionally since we don't have a bunch of bumblebees down here in the basement, and these have to be hand pollinated. So I'm gonna switch this around. All right, there you go. So it's as simple as using something like this, a Q-tip, and this Q-tip's been right around my pocket, so I'm gonna have to get another one. But actually, yeah, I got one right here. Okay, so as simple as taking a Q-tip like this one right here, and then when you see these little flowers opening up, you don't typically have to worry about this if you're outside because you got bumblebees and other pollinators, but you just simply take a Q-tip and you're just simulating what the pollinators are going to do. But this is all I do with these flowers when they're inside. That's all it takes. Or you can opt for the bumblebees inside the basement. But that's just a simple Q-tip. And then, so when these flowers now grow out, they're gonna look like that one up there. But something that's a characteristic of the strawberry plants is the first fruits are usually the largest. Like this guy down here, he's got a pretty good size on him. So I'm expecting the rest of these flowers on here are not going to be as big as that for multiple reasons. One, there's probably about 15 flowers on it right now. So the demand off this plant is going to be huge. And I would have to push them pretty hard, both with water and fertilizer, and I don't want to push this poor plant that hard yet. This is my demo plant, so I've been taking this around to uh, meetings this last week so people could see what's possible with growing food in Minnesota this time of the year. Because it's snowing here today, and I got a strawberry plant that's about ready to eat, so that's pretty cool. But that's the update on the nursery. There you go. So as I said in the past live streams, we start off kind of like it's kind of like when I was in the military with training. You have a crawl, walk, run type pace, and that's really similar to how a plant nursery operates. Is where we start off slow. So like even 2 weeks ago, I didn't even have these trays going. This week is a big push, so I'm gonna be starting a lot of the warm season plants. Not a ton of them yet, but they're going to be starting here in the next week, and those are going to be the peppers and tomatoes. I'll be usually about the 15th of March is when I start those. But today I want to talk to you about water and water quality because that's something that's overlooked a lot, and I don't I don't typically see YouTube videos on this. That's kind of why I wanted to cover it. Uh, Regardless of the growing system that you have, and there's three traditional ones like I've mentioned in the past. You have in-ground growing, you have raised bed growing, and then you have container growing like I do with MEG's edible landscapes. Regardless of the growing system that you have, you need to pay attention, or I would suggest you pay attention to the water and the water quality. So for instance, we're out on the acreage in the rural part of Minnesota. I naturally use well water, but there's some problems with that. And the big problem is not only is the pH a little wonky, but I have hard water, which is common for Minnesota, and it's not even the hardness of the water, it's other issues with the total alkalinity. So I'm not going to go down the chemistry rabbit hole. We're just going to kind of touch on it. And I just wanted to talk about some terms that you may not have heard before, but if you're going to grow food and you want to set your plants up for success, it's something you really need to pay attention to. So, rainwater, if you have an in-ground garden or a raised bed garden, rain rainwater is naturally acidic. So that's important to know because when we start talking about fertilizer or soil composition, soil, if you're talking about topsoil or something that you'd be planting like corn into the ground, the soil is naturally, it has a negative charge. And we need to be aware of that because it's a living ecosystem. So if one part of that system, like pH, starts to creep up or go down, uh, that's going to affect the types and amounts of nutrients that the plant can absorb. If the pH gets too far out of whack, it can actually prohibit certain nutrients from being taken up by the plants. And it's not that the plant can't take them up, it's just they can't take them up at that time because chemically speaking, those nutrients may be locked, or we call them locked up. So even though there might be a ton of calcium or nitrogen, more so calcium or magnesium, they they might be, you could think of it like a magnet where they're glued to the soil so hard that the plant can't actually grab that nutrient and use it. Calcium being a common example. So so one of the terms we need to know about is pH. Lots of plants prefer the pH to be a little acidic. So neutral, if you remember from your high school chemistry classes, neutral is 7. Anything below 7 is going to be acidic. Anything above that is going to be basic or alkaline. And this is crucial because if you have well water, and I have one customer who has well water, so I'm cognizant of that when I'm setting plants up at that house because if we have a dry run to summer and we have to use supplemental irrigation water, I already know it's going to have a lot of alkalinity to it, and uh, there's going to be some other issues too. So I proactively adjust the potting soil to those plants before I deliver them to that house and that house alone. My other customers that are in town, I don't have to worry about that because they're on city water. The city water is treated. I know what the pH is, and that's more predictable. But let's say you live in the country like I do and you have well water, I can guarantee if you're irrigating all summer long, especially in containers, it's going to really show up. If you're irrigating with well water all summer long, your plants by the end of the season are going to be very upset uh, for multiple reasons. But one of the reasons is most likely the pH is going to go up. And as the pH goes up, there's going to be less and less nutrients that that plant needs, calcium again, for an example. And I think next week I'm probably gonna actually break out the table elements so I can actually show uh, exactly what it looks like. But as the pH goes up, calcium is one of the elements that's going to get locked out. So that's for example. Th there's some other issues too, but that's the big one I want to start with pH for this week. And there's a couple of ways to test it. So if you have in-ground garden that you're going to be growing, your local extension service, usually through your land grant college. So here in Minnesota, it's the University of Minnesota Extension Service. They have a soil testing lab. It's fairly inexpensive. I think it's somewhere around $20. You're gonna send like a Ziploc baggie like this to them, and then they're gonna test your soil, and they're gonna give a detailed report back to you, so you know what your pH is for one. They're gonna tell you organic material, and then they're gonna tell you some other elements like nitrogen and some other common nutrients that your plants require. So that's a good starting point is having your soil tested. If you're gonna be growing in containers like I do, like something like this with a grow bag, that's fine too, but it's gonna be a little bit different because you could send your potting soil off to the lab to get tested, but if you have something like this, test strips, I don't know if you've ever seen these before. These are test strips. They're really quick, and I'd recommend get some like this. There's a couple of companies that make these type of test kits. This is Hatch. Lamont's another one, but it's a very quick test. And I did some YouTube videos earlier this week that showed how I did that. So you can check those out in the library. It's a quick test with the water. Just run whatever irrigation water you're using. You pull the strip out, swirl it around in the water, and then on the side of this, you match up the squares with the scale, and it'll tell you where you're at for pH. And I have a bunch of this one's a 5 test strip set up here, so I'm actually testing for other stuff too. But that's the first thing I would recommend checking is your pH, because if you're starting out with a pH of, let's say, like 7.5, just a second there. I had to give the shout out. If you're starting and your pH is above neutral, so it's in the alkaline territory, you're already setting your plants up for a very rough summer. So if you know that your water that you're going to be using to irrigate those plants is where we want to see them, so, and I got a ladybug on me. There you go. If you're starting out and your water's in the slightly acidic zone, so 6 to 7, you're good. Um, But what happens if you're above uh, neutral? So you're in the alkaline territory and you want a successful experience with your plants. There's a couple ways you can adjust for that. If you're using containers, this is something that I really have to pay very close attention to because with a container like this, that's a quarter gallon. So this is a quarter gallon grow bag. There's not a lot of room for air. So unlike plants in the ground that can send the roots out to find what they need, containers don't have that luxury. So what I do, and this is common, is I use an amendment, and that amendment is just raw sulfur. And you can usually find this at horticulture supply stores. They call it elemental sulfur. It's going to come in little pellets, and then you can add this to the potting mix or your soil. Over time, as uh, that combines with water, it's actually going to make it more acidic. Sulfur and water is going to make sulfuric acid, which sounds kind of scary because that's what we use in our car batteries, but it's actually not that scary. It's common in the horticulture industry to use that acid amongst the other ones, like phosphoric acid or citric acid, to gently lower the pH. Because like I said, if the pH gets too far out of whack, even if we have the elements that the plant needs, it's not they're not going to be available to that plant. So dip strips is one thing. I had two other tools that I was using this week that I wanted to talk about, and this is especially true for container gardening. If you start to get into like hydroponics, you're going to see these terms a lot more, but something else I was testing for was EC, or electrical current. So I was using a tool like this. It's a digital probe, so you can kind of see what that looks like. And this one's really easy to use. So what I did for one of my tests was called a slurry test. And that was, I took a sample of that strawberry plant. I put it in a cup like this. I added uh, I added water to it, and it wasn't tap water. I didn't put well water in it. I actually used deionized water. So I didn't want that water to affect the results of this test. So after about 15-20 minutes of this, it's called a slurry test. So the slurry, then I dip this EC pen in here, and then it would give me a value. So the value I had on that test shown on that video was 1.16, and that's very good. So that means I don't have a lot of salts in my potting soil, which is exactly where I need to be. But this is another tool that I use. Uh, this one is my backup. I started messing around with this one last year too. It's a very quick test for something very simpler by Blue Lab. It's got these little lights on here. This one activates when I submerge this into the liquid. It'll give me a reading on here that I use. But so for the two items that I tested for my water was pH, and then I also tested for EC, salts, and the soil more specifically. And then I also checked for total alkalinity. So that goes back to this strip right here. That's calcium carbonate. So that's something I have to test too, because that's coming up out of the well water. That's something you don't typically have to worry about if you're growing with city tap water. But if you're pulling water up out of the earth, out of a deep well like we have, there's probably going to be a lot of carbonates on it, and that's going to throw off the potting soil if you're in containers. And like I said at the beginning of this, rainwater is a little bit acidic, so that's like the optimum. We would love to have nature water the plants, but it's not always ideal. Also, here in Minnesota, we have wild temperature swings. Not only temperature, but we have wild humidity swings. That's probably one of the best parts of living in Minnesota is we have 4 seasons, but sometimes we have 4 seasons in the same month, and it makes it very difficult uh, to plan and to grow. But after you get some reps underneath your belt, it gets a lot easier because you anticipate And like talking about the water, if I already know my water is not that great, I can adjust it by some of uh, those responses or those ways to adjust it, like I mentioned with the elemental sulfur. Actually, this year for outside, if we have a dry spring, I'm gonna have to start injecting sulfur into my irrigation lines. That's common too for the nursery, but um, outside of capturing rainwater, if we have a dry spring, I'm not gonna have the option. So we were very fortunate last year that we had a very wet spring and very wet winter, so I didn't have to irrigate my potted plants much with well water. But this last week, I just tested the well water and it hasn't gotten better. It's actually gotten worse. So I'll do some videos on that too when I start setting up an injection system. But I'm actually gonna have to acidify my water before it gets out to these guys in the hoop house. Because if I don't, like I said, if I don't do that, over time the pH is gonna creep up and I'm gonna start building up other nasty stuff like salts and carbonates in the soil. So that's at a super advanced level. If you're just starting out with growing, you need to know that not all water is the same. Not all the water is the same quality. pH is something you'd be looking at. So this dip strip like this is something that you can use to quickly check to see where your pH is. And then if you want to get a little bit higher than that, you can start looking at carbonates, total alkalinity. And then I also recommend that if this is your first time growing, if you're choosing to grow in a bed or in the topsoil, if you have topsoil. Good morning, Sarah. Uh, if you're going to be growing in the soil, you have the Minnesota. If you're in Minnesota, Minnesota Extension through the University of Minnesota has a lab that can test your soil. If you're in another state, look for your or Google land grant university, and your local land grant extension will show up. They typically have a lab that they could test your soil, and then they can give you a result back before you start the season. I'd recommend doing it right now unless your ground's frozen, which that's the lovely part of being up north. Um, but test your soil. If you're gonna do potting soil and you're just starting out, I'd recommend getting a pre-made potting soil mix. So I make my own potting soil now, or I mix it. That's something I'll probably cover in the future. But if you want to grow in containers, I'd get a pre-mix to make it easy. But that's something also that you can check too is the pH. So that slurry test that I did earlier this week, if you get those dip strips, you can do a slurry test on your potting soil mix. It gives you feedback on pH and a couple other pieces of information you need for a successful experience. But this is the water week. So next week we're going to be talking more about plants that we're setting up for this summer, and we're getting into summer crops now already. So this is going to be a busy week because I think I have about 12 to 15 trays I'm starting here in the next couple days. And I'm firing up the germination chamber too, so I'll show you guys that probably next week. But anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll look forward to answering those next week. But until then, I look forward